Dr. Rajan Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's pleased to take the other half of this call on the budget. And what I was looking for in this budget, Mr. Speaker, is its vision. What vision does it reflect of contemporary New Zealand society and contemporary issues facing our people? And I was looking and asking for myself the question, does it put people first? And if it did, then I would take the budget seriously. Because people, after all, Mr. Speaker, are the most important. And if we don't put our people first, we don't develop them well, we don't give them the opportunities, then we all, in the end, pay for it and pay huge amounts of money to kind of correct those problems that are created when we don't put our people first. And that was not the vision of this particular budget. Its vision was somewhere else. Its vision was of a divisive society. It was not a vision of treating our most vulnerable well. And then I asked, Mr. Speaker, well, what does it do with one of the most serious questions facing New Zealand society today? One of the most serious problems. And this is the problem of inequality. I say to Honourable Todd McClay, that is a problem that's facing New Zealand society. I don't think anybody in this House doubts that inequality is awful, that inequality ought to be addressed. And particularly when that inequality has very serious impacts, Mr. Speaker, on our children. And yet we know that the budget did not address those inequalities. The budget really began to say that, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to select a small group of the most vulnerable and we're going to target some services towards them. And I know Paul Hutchison will soon talk about targeting, but when there's such a big group, Mr. Hutchison, 285,000 children who are living in poverty, then where is the morality, where is the ethics of addressing 30,000 of them? Where is the morality? How do you work that out, Mr. Hutchison? Because in a sense, it's condemning the other 250,000 children to poverty. And what that does, Mr. Hutchinson, it simply creates another generation for the welfare system to cope with, and for the health system to cope with, and for the justice system to cope with. We create bigger problems down the track, Mr. Hutchison. And yet we know that for children, that moment of their life, that 0 to 3 years is what sets them up in their path, in the development trajectory throughout the rest of their lives. And that's what does it. So every piece of science we know says that that's where we should target. So everybody in this group ought to be targeted. But when it's 285,000, Mr. Hutchinson, and we're targeting 30,000, then what is this silly game we're playing? Because it really is condemning the most vulnerable to even more miserable lives. And there's plenty of evidence to show that we have kind of, we haven't applied the kind of morality, the decency about creating a society where all boats are lifted. No, we're wanting to advantage a small group of that. And that's where this budget fails abysmally. And our alternative ideas around children and Best Start actually begins to address very systematically each step, each segment of what it takes to lift all those boats and to give those people a better state in life. So, Mr. Speaker, this is my last budget speech, it's a brief one. So I make it with some sadness because I came into Parliament after a life of working with the most vulnerable, working with children and families, and 45 years of that. And to now see a period here where we are not addressing the most vulnerable, I say that with some sadness. And much of what Nick Smith said was really just discounting 9 years of very positive development, 9 years of economic management that gave this government the headroom to manage the headwinds that came. If it wasn't for that, it would have been in dire trouble. But they don't have the decency, Mr. Speaker, to actually acknowledge that. It was all designed simply to create the Crosby-Textor type spin. They throw those figures around, but their own performance is really immoral, Mr. Speaker. It's immoral when looked at from the perspective of putting children and families first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Todd McClay.
Mr. Speaker, this was a very good budget. New Zealand is